My name is Noble Ray, and I'll be discussing Discipline with Dignity, which was crafted by Richard L. Kerwin, Alan N. Mendler, and Brian D. Mendler. This edition was first published in 1980, and there has since been 3 additional editions. All 3 of these authors were experienced educators and psychologists, school psychologists, and they have all traveled around the world teaching their knowledge about discipline with dignity and just showing educators all around the world how to do this. This theory was necessary because during the time that this first edition was released, there was a rising conflict in schools between students and teachers. In the 1980s and 70s and 80s, more than ever before, statistically, there was rising crime and rising behavioral problems in schools, and parental involvement was very much falling off at this time. Parents were less involved, students were behaving a lot worse, and there was no accountability there. And teachers, in response to this, wanted to regain control of their classrooms, so they adopted new discipline programs which were very harsh and seek to exclude students who may have a behavioral problem or two out of the classroom completely. And this was pushed on by standardized tests because during this time, standardized tests were rising and teachers were focused on scores only, and they really just wanted those bad students out of their classrooms. And so this new push just got these students out of the classroom instead of helping them. So schools really became two-tiered at this point, with the behavioral students outside of the classroom just dropping out and getting out of there, and the good students being focused on more. And so clearly a new fair approach to discipline was clearly needed because these students were just falling through the cracks at this point. So the main goals of Discipline with Dignity are to help children make better choices, emphasize building positive relationships, focus on all students, create responsible citizens, as well as long-term behavioral change instead of just short-term change in one class, and overall just make life easier for teachers and students as well. So this can all be summed up in the phrase creating positive motivation for students, and this has 3 aspects to it, which are build connections, increase student involvement, and create learning opportunities from penalties. The first aspect of this is to build connections between students and their educators. This is a fundamental starting point in any classroom, as the strength of a good relationship can help minimize conflicts. And doing this, teachers must earn the trust of their students right away in this model. This is just good advice in general, because if teachers have these relationship with these kids, the kids are more likely to want to comply with their teachers because they have that connection. A practical way to do this in an everyday classroom is simply to greet kids every day, to find out their interests. Just have personal conversations with them, with each student in your class. Don't just single out one group or another. Talk to every single one of them. Know their interests, what they like to do, what they're involved in. And on top of that, when you find out their involvements, show up to stuff. Be visible to them. Show them that you care about them and that you're interested in them and their success in the classroom. All of this, just treat them like a human, treat them like you care, like I said. Just show them that you that you're there to help them, that you're an ally and not an enemy. And also, in doing this, building these connections, an important aspect of this model is to create strategies to meet the individual needs of each student. Discipline is very individualized because not all students respond to the same consequences in the same way. So to be most effective, you need to find out strategies that help each student individually. A good example of this is creating mindfulness activities which reduce stress, and just having individual activities for each student and teacher whenever the conflict arises. The second aspect of this is increasing student involvement. Students, they found in general, have a problem with authority, and that's pretty blatant, just through personal experience especially. Students are not likely to follow rules given by authorities, especially when it's a school-wide rule system that's just handed down by administrators who aren't even in the classroom. So, especially at older ages, students tend to act up out of disdain for a certain teacher. So if a teacher is just overarching in their discipline and just harsh and humiliating and all this, students are more likely to act out because they just don't respect the teacher and they don't like them. They found that students in some classes acted perfectly normal and well behaved, and they went to the next class and acted out in very bad ways. So this model argues that students are more likely to comply when included in decisions. Like I said earlier, a big goal of this model was to create responsible citizens that can make decisions on their own. And so this is a big aspect of this model. And it argues that students should be involved in creating rules and consequences. And a practical approach to this for any future educators is to engage students in the problem-solving process by doing things like a social contract, which involves students and teachers working together to create the rules and consequences of those rules. In this social contract process, the students and the teacher both will be tested on their knowledge of the new classroom rules. That way, ensuring that each party has a thorough knowledge and that there's accountability there. The third aspect of this is to create learning opportunities. The main goal, like we said, was to create a long-term behavioral plan because a lot of times teachers just focus on a short-term fix that has no real impact on them outside of the class. So a big thing here is to avoid humiliations. This really just, there's no positive impact on this, and it really hurts the kids and makes them act out even more. And it's important to stray away from a reward and punishment system. Like we talked about earlier, it is more important to create individual-based consequences that push the student to acting better, just as a necessity in order to better themselves instead of just fear of their teacher and fear of not getting that reward. An important thing also in this model is to discipline in private. If a behavior infraction occurs in class, you obviously want to deal with that in a calm and even way while the infraction is occurring. Take care of it as you can, but don't hand out that discipline right then and there in front of all the other students because they have a tendency to act out even more in front of their peers. So you want to wait until after the class is over and discuss with them in private and have a discussion. Don't just hand out a consequence. Just say, how can we come up with a consequence that best affects this? And through that, just try to focus on finding the underlying cause of that behavioral infraction, because like I said, there might be a lot of things outside that are affecting this. And really just emphasizes a structured but flexible approach to discipline. It's structured in that there is consequences to actions for everybody, but yet it's flexible because each student might have a different consequence. And this is still fair because students are being disciplined still and have consequences, but these consequences are helping them individually. And just this process in total makes them more responsible for their consequences and their actions. So my opinion on this model, I think it's effective for the most part. Obviously, you'll have students that stand out in any model just because some students just like to act out, and there's nothing you can really do about that. But I think for the vast majority of students, this is one of the best models you can implement. And personally, I would implement at least parts of this model at all times in my classroom. And it's very easy to do too. I think the connections and involvement are super important, and I plan to make that a goal from day one, just making those personal connections and getting involved with them, as well as getting them involved in their class. I want my students to be involved in the process of, like I said, rules and consequences, but just wanting to be involved in the content and just having a good time in their classroom environment. So I think those connections and involvement are key. And personally, I was a troublemaker in school, and so I realized early on that what works and what didn't work for me, and it really just made me angry when teachers would act like in a humiliating way and stuff like that. So I know how important it is to have that individualized approach, because at the end of the day, students they want to learn, they want to succeed, but a lot of times they're hindered in that. And so I would definitely implement this in my classroom, and I think this is a very solid plan. And here are my sources. Thank you.